The camera cuts with a jarring snap to the polished steel gates of the Global Energy Security Expo's VIP pavilion, each panel reflecting the glare of overhead spotlights. Inside, rows of AR-15-style defense units and drone surveillance modules glint behind bulletproof glass. Silent witnesses to an industry built on readiness and resilience. The hum of conversation dies as the doors whoosh open and Dr. Aisha Grant strides forward. Founder and CEO of SentinelShield, she commands a billion-dollar enterprise delivering rapid-deploy security shelters to conflict zones worldwide. Her tailored Navy power suit drapes perfectly over her shoulders. Her speaker badge glints at her lapel. Yet a towering guard plants himself before her arms crossed. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he says, voice flat and unyielding. "This area is closed to your pass." The guard's sotto voce not authorized flashes on the screen as subtitles, a quiet but cutting echo of exclusion. Pulsing staccato beats slam in the soundtrack, then fall away to silence as a voiceover rumbles. Why would a globally recognized CEO be barred from her own event? If you believe injustice deserves a swift reckoning, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and comment below with what you'd do if they tried to silence you. Dr. Grant's jaw tightens, not in anger, but in measured resolve. She allows a heartbeat to pass, absorbing the betrayal of the moment. Just moments before, she'd shared a triumphant keynote introducing SentinelShield's newest safe haven shelter, rapid deploy units capable of protecting up to 200 civilians anywhere on the planet within 12 hours. Global leaders watched in awe. Media outlets praised her vision. Yet here she stands, locked out by a guard who doesn't recognize a name on the Forbes list, a CEO whose firm protects the most vulnerable. The irony cuts deeper than any blade. She lifts her chin every inch the composed leader. The guard's words hover in the charged air, a flimsy shield of protocol that barely conceals the prejudice beneath. Around them, the bustle of the expo carries on. Diplomats cluster at a nearby booth. Private security contractors flick through brochures and expo staffers scurry to arrange the next demonstration. None pause at this public slight. Their indifference, an echo of an age-old bias, power sees power, but privilege still overlooks the dignity of a black woman in command. Aisha's mind races through the logistics of 5 minutes ago. Her badge scanned, her credentials verified by the expo's system, her invitation stamped by the director himself. There were emails confirming her VIP access, SMS texts from organizers promising a front row seat at the main stage. And yet here she is, stalled by a single guard whose check-in tablet displays nothing but an error code. She inhales, tasting the metallic edge of injustice. She could let this slide move to the sidelines and await the next speaking slot, but that would let prejudice win. Her assistant, tucked just beyond the guard's shoulder, catches her eye and offers a discreet thumbs up, ready to document every moment. Aisha draws strength from that silent solidarity. She places one hand on her hip and reaches into her jacket pocket with the other, pulling out her phone. It's not to record a selfie or scroll through emails. She's about to orchestrate a counterstrike that will reverberate through this expo. The guard shifts, sensing a shift in power. He glances at his radio fingers hovering over the call button. Aisha meets his gaze, steady, unbroken. She knows the world is watching, cameras tucked into corners, journalists poised with microphones, influencers streaming live. This moment is bigger than a gated pavilion. It's a test of principle, a crucible where token gestures dissolve and genuine accountability emerges. She brings the phone to her ear, pressing the call button on her earpiece. "General Counsel," she murmurs, voice calm yet urgent. "Get ready to document every word." Simultaneously, her assistant lifts a discreet camera, capturing the guard's clipped apology. The expo's polished veneer now cracked. Even the sleek kiosk screens flanking the entrance flicker in response to her digital command. A quick email to the expo director's office lights up their corporate inbox. Why is SentinelShield's CEO barred from the VIP pavilion? Explain or face public action. She taps send, knowing the ping will arrive with her name in the subject line, unmistakable, unignorable. The guard's posture stiffens. A hush falls over the immediate area, drawn in by the tension. Nearby attendees pause mid-stride, sensing something corporate must address. Aisha allows the silence to stretch, an invisible gavel calling for justice. Her presence fills the frame, her shoulders squared, each breath a quiet declaration that she will not be deferred. 5 seconds stretch to 10. 15. The guard's radio crackles to life as he seeks confirmation from higher up. Behind him, Expo staff file past, their eyes flicking between Aisha's unwavering silhouette and the guard's faltering stance. In this suspended moment, the raw truth reveals itself. Policy can be rewritten, systems can be challenged, and the dignity of one CEO can demand the respect of many. Finally, the radio phrase comes back. Let her through. The guard clears his throat, steps aside, and offers a curt nod. But Aisha doesn't move immediately. A guard's concession is not a pardon. It's an acknowledgement of error. She allows a final moment for the cameras to capture the reversal. Then, with deliberate grace, she steps forward, her heels clicking once against the marble, each click a proclamation that exclusion breeds its own consequence. As the swivel doors welcome her in the crowd, parts instinctively, some applauding, others murmuring. Aisha strides past the wall of Brahms and Sons security drones and heads straight for the main stage, her mission unchanged: to speak truth to power and demand that dignity never be negotiable. And as the Expo director meets her in the foyer, breathless apologies tumbling from his lips, Aisha's voice rings clear. Thank you. But the best apology will be a change of policy, not just words. She pauses, scans the expectant faces, then smiles. Now, she says, let's get to work. Justice serves swift and with the mic firmly in her hand. Dr. Aisha Grant exhaled slowly, centering herself against the gleaming pane of reinforced glass that separated her from the bustling exhibit hall. Beyond the Global Energy Security Expo's main stage was set an expanse of polished oak flooring, backlit by an array of LEDs pulsing in the colors of SentinelShield's logo, emerald green and steel gray. Rows of seats awaited dignitaries, diplomats, and industry magnates, all of whom had come to witness her unveiling of the safe haven deployable shelter. Instead, Aisha found herself trapped in the VIP pavilion's antechamber, sidelined by an opaque bureaucratic directive that bore no resemblance to the open access leadership she championed. Her mind flicked back to the earliest days, the cramped university lab at Oxford, where she first skimmed the pages of a decommissioned armored vehicle manual to understand how to weld a frame that could withstand small arms fire. As a Rhodes Scholar, she'd immersed herself in materials science, forging connections between composite polymers and reactive ceramics. But theory was never enough. She'd recruited a ragtag team of engineers, shaped their ideas into rugged prototypes, and secured a seed grant that had felt impossibly large, at the time $50,000, to build a single shelter capable of withstanding mortar blasts. Hundreds of sleepless nights later, those rough-hewn test units had saved scores of lives in a conflict zone in South Sudan, sparking the interest of UN agencies and prompting multi-million-dollar contracts. Tonight, SentinelShield managed over $1.2 billion in active contracts across Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, providing everything from inflatable command centers to solar-powered water purification modules. As CEO, Aisha navigated boardrooms with the same precision she applied in lab meetings, each decision a calculated balance between cost-effectiveness and maximum human safety. She'd briefed defense ministers, debriefed field commanders, and conducted crisis simulations with international relief organizations. At 55, she'd flown more hours in cargo planes than many airline pilots, landing on makeshift airstrips to oversee deployments herself. Her decorated military service had begun long before SentinelShield's founding. Commissioned as a logistician in the U.S. Army, she'd orchestrated supply chains for disaster relief missions in Haiti and coordinated airdrops in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Her leadership there earned her a Meritorious Service Medal and shaped her conviction that no community, however remote or ravaged, should ever be without shelter, clean water, and the dignity of safety. That conviction drove every boardroom presentation and every executive decision, even as her firm's revenue climbed into the 9 figures. She never allowed profit to overshadow purpose. At this expo, her safe haven modules were to be the crowning jewel. Each unit collapsed into a backpack-sized cylinder, then expanded in under 5 minutes into a 5-by-5-meter steel-reinforced structure with room for dozens. Integrated solar panels and modular medical bays promised a turnkey solution for first responders and peacekeepers alike. Investors had flown in from Dubai, Brussels, and Washington, Journalists prepped their cameras, and NGOs queued for private demos. The Expo guidebook had even highlighted her keynote slot as the must-see event of the evening. Yet here she stood on the wrong side of a line that should have recognized her as hero, not hurdle. The guard who refused her caused more than a simple scheduling error. He triggered a cascade of microaggressions she had endured countless times before the assumption that a black woman could not hold the reins of a billion-dollar enterprise. The disbelief that someone with her pedigree would command global security resources. The unspoken bias that made her credentials invisible behind a badge that should have been embossed with authority. She watched through the tinted glass as the Expo's MC, another speaker, less seasoned, less qualified, took the stage with a flourish. Polished speeches were delivered about next-generation drones and cyber defense grids, while the real-world solutions she pioneered gathered dust several yards away. The irony stung here was a pavilion dedicated to protecting infrastructure, yet it failed to protect the principles of inclusion and equal access for those who built those defenses. Her assistant Malik stepped beside her, leaning close to whisper that the press gallery was live streaming the event. Every second of exclusion would be recorded, replayed on social feeds, and dissected by pundits. Aisha welcomed the exposure. She would harness the spotlight that her forced absence created. In her 9 years leading SentinelShield, she had never shied away from confrontation when injustice emerged. She'd initiated rapid response investigations into partner organizations guilty of contracting abuses in the field, and she'd secured reparations for communities harmed by substandard shelter units. She understood that change often demanded visible accountability. Aisha placed a steady hand on the glass, the cold surface grounding her swirling emotions. She pictured the infants and elders who depended on her shelters in war-torn villages, the medics operating inside her modules, providing life-saving care under bullet-scarred skies. They would never be turned away. She would not be turned away tonight either. A hush fell as the MC wrapped up, inviting the keynote speaker to step forward. The empty podium gleamed under the spotlight, her spotlight by all rights. Instead, the lesser voice advanced, tugging at the microphone cord to adjust the height. She envisioned herself on that stage, commanding attention, commanding respect, commanding the narrative. That's where she belonged, not sidelined by a petty security directive. Malik glanced at her eyes, reflecting both concern and admiration. Aisha gave him a single nod, no words necessary. He slipped a small earpiece into her hand, a direct line to their legal counsel and PR team ready to activate should she need to challenge the exclusion. Behind them, Expo attendees clustered around vendor booths, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the pavilion's entrance. As the other speaker launched into a rehearsed overview, Aisha's mind worked in tandem: legal strategy, communications plan, ethical imperative. She would step beyond the threshold through diplomacy or disruption and claim the stage. Her next move would not be timid. She would not wait for permission. She would seize it. Because Dr. Aisha Grant, Rhodes Scholar and decorated veteran, had mastered the art of turning obstacles into opportunities. And this barrier, erected by unseen bias and bureaucratic blind spots, would be no exception. The world would soon watch her do what she did best: protect the powerless and demand justice on their behalf. Her moment was coming sooner than anyone expected, and far more powerful than any keynote address could capture. Dr. Aisha Grant's fingers hovered over her phone as the guard's tablet emitted that dismissive buzz. Just moments before, she'd stepped smartly to the armored checkpoint, her posture all the quiet confidence of a woman who had flown into active war zones and negotiated ceasefires over the crackle of radio static. She presented her VIP badge, its polished metal catching the overhead lights, and her digital invitation, which flickered on her phone screen with the holographic signature of the Expo director himself. Within a heartbeat, the guard's device had acknowledged the credentials, a series of green check marks dancing across the display. Aisha allowed herself a brief, triumphant smile until the screen inexplicably glitched, the check marks disappearing under a swirl of red text. The guard's brow furrowed. He tapped the tablet, swiping through menus as though hoping a new screen would reveal her legitimacy. Instead, the device spat out the official line. "Our system doesn't recognize you for this session." His voice was flat, the words delivered with the precision of someone trained never to betray emotion. Behind him, A cluster of men in tailored suits lingered expo organizers or perhaps corporate sponsors, leaning close to murmur into each other's ears, eyes flickering nervously to avoid direct contact. They formed a backdrop of silent complicity, like judges watching a trial unfold without lifting a finger to intervene. Aisha watched the guard's posture shift, his arms crossing in front of him, as though folding a door shut. The military bearing he'd been instructed to adopt now worked against him. His rigid stance underscored the absurdity of his assertion. She lifted her chin, steadying her breath. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of her credentials. "I've received confirmation from your team. Please scan my badge again." She offered her wrist-mounted security token embossed with SentinelShield's insignia and linked to every major contracting authority in conflict zones around the globe. He didn't budge. Instead, he cleared his throat and recited the first of many canned responses. "We've had a schedule conflict." His tone suggested he had memorized each excuse in a morning briefing headlined, "How to Handle VIP Disputes." Aisha pressed on, recalling that a power imbalance could be challenged simply by insisting on clarity. A schedule conflict, she echoed, stepping closer, so her words cut through the protective bubble of his headset. "My session is on the official agenda. There are digital backups in your system." Her gaze swept the checkpoint's polished counterstacks of expo catalogs, branded water bottles, tablets resting in docks waiting for legitimate scans. Everywhere she looked, technology offered entry, except for the one screen she needed. The guard's lips thinned. He glanced back at the suits behind him as though seeking a diplomatic lifeline. One man in a charcoal blazer leaned in to offer a whispered suggestion, only to retreat when Aisha's eyes locked onto his. Another shook his head, tapping furiously on his phone as though retrieving a secret memo. "Capacity reached," the guard declared next, as though that should have settled the matter. Aisha's jaw clenched imperceptibly. "Capacity reached?" She surveyed the lobby beyond. Half the seats at the main stage remained empty, the live-stream cameras spinning idly on their tripods. If there was a capacity issue, it would be easily resolved by shifting a few unsubscribed attendees. But no one on the other side of the glass seemed willing to admit there was room for a woman who had built an empire out of saving lives. Seconds lingered like hours. The guard offered another polish management directive. He gestured vaguely toward a corridor lined with mirrored panels and discreetly shuttered doors. Aisha followed his gesture with a measured nod, speaking softly but clearly enough for a nearby reporter to catch the gist. "Is this a new policy change or a misunderstanding?" she asked. "If it's a directive, who can clarify it?" She phrased her question less as a challenge and more as an invitation for transparency, recalling that true leadership often requires asking the right questions. Still, the guard only read from the script. "I'm just the gatekeeper," he said, voice shrill with the strain of his own discomfort. "Please direct your inquiries to the registration desk." He stepped aside to avoid her gaze, allowing another attendee, this one in a tweed jacket and leather briefcase, to breeze past without a second look. Aisha felt a flash of solidarity for the man who delivered a polite nod to the guard before vanishing into the hall. None of them sensed the indignity she faced, that a black woman-decorated veteran and UN advisor could be so smoothly erased by a line of code in a tablet's memory banks. She took a slow breath, letting it out in controlled exhalation. The ambient noise of the expo, the low rumble of conversations, the distant thump of generator tests, the hum of fluorescent lights settled around her like a thick cushion. Aisha allowed herself to feel the sting of the slight, acknowledging it without letting it define her. She remembered every time she'd been underestimated in classrooms, the professor's surprise at her aptitude. In boardrooms, the male executive's half-cocked disbelief at her projections. In UN chambers, the subtle shift in posture when she entered the dais. Each instance of bias had felt like a personal wound. This was no different, though it took place under the glimmer of an expo built to showcase solutions for global security. Rubbing the smooth edge of her badge, she let her mind pivot to strategy. She could escalate this with an email to the director, but that would take time. She could retreat and wait for a follow-on panel, but waiting had never been her style. She could demand to speak right here, declare a challenge into the open microphone she knew sat idly at the security desk for last-minute briefings. After all, if she could not enter the hall as a keynote speaker, she could certainly claim the airwaves as an impromptu address. The guard, sensing her narrowing options, raised his voice to summon a colleague. Bring me the registration supervisor, he barked into his radio. His companion, a younger man in a polo shirt, emerged from the mirrored corridor, clutching a clipboard stuffed with laminated passes. He tried the same trick, scanning her badge, tapping his own tablet, repeating the policy lines. Each excuse built on the last, a flimsy fortress of words threatening to hold back a tidal wave of expertise and authority. Aisha's pulse steadied. Glancing at Malik, she saw the tiny camera feed on his lapel already live streaming to an audience she couldn't see yet knew was growing. She picked her moment. "Gentlemen," she said, voice rising in calm command. "I'm Dr. Aisha Grant. You invited me to speak tonight. I'm here right now to fulfill that invitation. If you cannot allow me through your checkpoint, I will speak from this lobby. The world will listen." The final words carried the weight of her reputation advisor to heads of state, grantor of life-preserving technology voice for civilians in conflict zones. The air crackled as the trio exchanged glances, respect mingled with panic in their eyes. Nearby attendees froze mid-step, smartphones pivoting in their hands. The guard's radio hissed. The other man's stylus quivered over the tablet. For the first time, policy trailed off into uncertainty, swallowed by the undeniable fact that a CEO denied her own stage could be more newsworthy than any planned demonstration behind bulletproof glass. A hush descended for a heartbeat. Then the guard's breath came ragged. He opened his mouth to deliver a fourth excuse. "You're causing a disturbance, but thought better of it." Instead, he stepped aside, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right," he muttered, voice low. "I'll let you through." The corridor doors slid open. Aisha's chin lifted, the barrier dissolving under the force of her composed defiance. She nodded once, acknowledging the concession not as victory, but as the beginning of accountability. With each step toward the main hall, she carried the resonance of a moment where bias confronted resolve, and for once the latter prevailed. No longer an outsider, she reclaimed the pathway to her keynote. Her presence a testament that prejudice veiled by procedure could be pierced by precision, purpose, and unwavering confidence. Aisha's heartbeat drummed in her ears, but her voice emerged smooth and unwavering. She slipped the earpiece from her ear, the faint crackle of her PR chief's feed, a reminder that every word would be heard and amplified. She fixed the guard with a steady gaze. "Who signed off on my exclusion?" she asked, her tone controlled yet laced with steel. The guard's jaw clenched. He glanced at his tablet, then back at her as though hoping the answer might materialize in the flicker of the screen. "Upper-level instructions," he mumbled, eyes darting toward the mirrored doorway where shadowy figures hovered. His voice lacked conviction, betraying uncertainty about his own orders. Aisha inhaled, recalling every boardroom where she'd sat behind the long mahogany table facing skeptics and naysayers who questioned her proposals, her background, even her presence in rooms designed for power. In those spaces, she had learned that accountability could not be evaded by protocol or rank. She had held ministers to their commitments, contractors to their warranties, and now she would hold this event's organizers to theirs. "I'm here to present groundbreaking, life-saving gear," she said, voice as calm as a lake at dawn. "Safe haven shelters can be deployed within minutes to protect civilians in conflict zones. The plans have been vetted, contracts signed, and agendas set. If you won't let me in, bring me the person who can." Each word was measured, polished by years of negotiation under pressure. A hush settled over the checkpoint. Nearby attendees, previously distracted by promotional banners and flashing screens, now pivoted to watch. Phones emerged from pockets, cameras trained on the standoff. In that pregnant silence, the guard's proclamation echoed upper-level instructions. But on whose authority? His eyes widened as he realized the question cut deeper than any procedural challenge. It demanded transparency. He swallowed his composure, faltering. He began, only to be cut off by Aisha's unwavering stare. She let the moment stretch, a silent demand for action. Somewhere behind the mirrored doors, expo organizers shifted uneasily, the weight of their own oversight pressing down on them. This was no ordinary hiccup in a conference schedule. It was a collision between progress and prejudice, a test of principle that could not be ignored. Finally, the guard lifted his radio to his lips. "Sir, ma'am," he corrected himself, voice cracking. "We need guidance. VIP badge, digital. Invite, everything checks out. What are the next steps?" His plea was more than protocol. It was an admission that the chain of command had broken. By asking for direction, he placed the burden and the embarrassment squarely on those who had issued the exclusion. Aisha's eyes followed his radio's flickering LED, a tiny beacon of the expo's internal machinery grinding into motion. She straightened, allowing her posture to convey both patience and power. "Take your time," she said quietly, voice carrying across the silent lobby. "I'll be right here." Behind her, Malik adjusted the small camera mounted on his lapel, ensuring every angle was covered. The live stream viewers would see the guard's hesitation, the inching forward of expo staff, and Aisha's calm inevitability. In boardrooms, she had learned that perception could be as potent as policy. A single moment of doubt could unravel months of preparation. After what felt like an eternity, the mirrored doors opened with a soft whoosh. A petite woman in a tailored blazer stepped forward. Ava Chen, the expo's director of programming, her badge reading Director Main Stage. She moved with brisk efficiency, slipping past the guard and approaching Aisha. Her expression was schooled polite, yet tinged with worry. "Dr. Grant, Eva," said, voice carefully neutral. "I apologize for the confusion. There was an administrative error with our session assignments this afternoon. It's been corrected. Please follow me inside." Aisha met Eva's eyes, searching for sincerity. Administrators often apologized for glitches they'd orchestrated. In the flicker of that gaze, Aisha weighed her next move: accept the contrition and reclaim her place, or use this public moment to demand more than just a door opening. She thought of the thousands who depended on SentinelShield's shelters, of the soldiers and civilians in distant deserts, waiting for her demonstration to catalyze new deployments. Time was not merely money, it was safety. Survival, lives saved or lost. She offered a single polite nod. "Thank you, Ms. Chen," she said, using the formal address to underscore the gravity of the situation. "I appreciate the correction, but understand this procedural fixes are welcome, but they must be backed by genuine policy changes." She let her words hang in the charged air. "No one else should face this barrier. I want your commitment that future VIP access will honor the credentials issued without exception." Eva Chen's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at the guard, who now stood at attention, phone in hand, awaiting her instructions. Eva reached out and tapped in a few commands on her smartphone. Her eyes flicked back to Aisha with a flicker of relief. "Understood," she said softly, though her tone carried the weight of concession. "We will institute real-time badge verification, bypassing manual checks for confirmed speakers. I will personally oversee the implementation." Aisha's gaze softened minutely enough to signal a fragile truce. She stepped aside as Eva opened the mirrored doors, wind rushing in to mingle with the distant hum of the exhibit hall. The safe haven modules gleamed in their display bay, ready to tell the story of her leadership and innovation. Yet as she moved forward to reclaim her stage, Aisha knew that the true victory lay not just in walking through this door, but in the promise of preventing the next CEO, perhaps a young engineer of color, from being denied entry. As the doors closed behind her, Aisha's mind was already racing ahead to the next confrontation, turning this personal triumph into industry-wide accountability. For now, she took a single breath, the frigid air of the hall brushing her cheeks, and stepped past the threshold with her chin held high. The guard's apologetic bow was less important than the echo of her steps on the polished floor. Each footfall resonated like a heartbeat, a measured cadence of resilience that would carry her to the main stage and beyond. The pavilion foyer felt like the eye of a storm, every stall in the exhibit hall humming with activity, yet all energy concentrated here at the point where power met prejudice. Staffers in crisp charcoal blazers formed an uneasy circle around Dr. Aisha Grant, whispering urgent instructions into their earpieces. Their eyes flicked between Aisha's calm form and the guard's rigid posture. Attendees craned their necks over the brass stanchions. Phones lifted skyward, eager to capture the moment this billion-dollar CEO clashed with the bureaucracy that barred her entry. Above them, banners proclaimed innovation and crisis response, each word dripping with irony as Aisha's flagship safe haven shelter stood just beyond the locked doors, its modular walls bathed in the glow of overhead spotlights, an emblem of swift rescue unreachable to its creator. Cameras circled like vultures, their lenses fixed on Aisha's steely gaze. Across the hall, a bank of live stream screens showed the standoff to remote viewers. Her figure, framed by the metallic gleam of military-grade shelters, the guard's profile etched against the mirrored back wall. The guard's radio crackled a sudden intrusion in the charged hush. "Stand by for policy update." His lips tightened as he relayed instructions through his headset, but the muffled words only amplified the uncertainty. Around him, Expo staff exchanged glances that mingled sympathy and fear. Fear of losing credence. If they defied their orders, sympathy for a woman repeatedly compelled to prove her legitimacy. Aisha felt each heartbeat thud in her chest, her mind racing faster than the video feed could transmit. In that vacuum of authority, multinational sponsors shifted in their ergonomic chairs just beyond the foyer's glass partition. She could see their frustration, a VIP lounge reserved for industry titans, now impassable to the CEO who had contracted billions in hardware for their governments. A handful of diplomats in sharp suits fidgeted as if uncertain whether to intervene or preserve diplomatic decorum. The music piped through hidden speakers, a swelling electronic score meant to underscore the Expo's cutting-edge vibe, now served as a metronome for tension. Every synthesized drum beat echoed in Aisha's ears. Thump, thump. Each camera cut tightened in sync, a rapid succession of close-ups on her unwavering eyes, her pursed lips, her fingers grazing the composite rim of her badge. This was no mere hiccup on the conference agenda. It had become the central drama, the narrative no press release could eclipse. Nearby, a banner showcasing SentinelShield's partnership with the United Nations flapped imperceptibly in the recessed air currents. The text read, "Protecting civilians, restoring hope." Yet the stark reality of the foyer exposed a glaring hypocrisy, a company built on delivering protection relegated to the other side of a locked door. For a moment, Aisha's reflection shimmered on the banner's glossy surface, a ghostly assertion of the leadership that demanded to be acknowledged. A young staffer, probably in his early 20s, whispered urgently into his collar mic, "Protocol overrides everything. We have orders from the director's office." His eyes darted nervously between Aisha and the locked doors. She allowed herself a small, empathetic nod. She recognized the conflict in his posture, the same moral quandaries she'd seen in supply officers debating side agreements in war zones. Rules were paper shields. True justice required action. Another camera angle caught her assistant Malik raising a finger to his lips before tapping the tablet. He held his first signal to let Aisha's composure guide the visual narrative. The live stream toggled text overlays. CEO Dr. Aisha Grant. Standoff 5 minutes unresolved. Comments streamed up the side. "This is insane." "Why refuse the keynote speaker?" "Unlock the door." The digital pulse of public sentiment grew moment by moment. Inside the conference hall, technicians prepared to switch slides, their laptops open, and queued for Aisha's presentation. In 2 minutes, the main stage lights would rise, the expectant crowd would quiet, and the expo director would step up to introduce her. Now they sat in limbo, unable to proceed, their preparations stalled by a question of access. Aisha pictured the empty microphone, the shimmering podium adorned with the expo's logo, and she imagined her own voice echoing through the hall just beyond the locked doors. A rustle of movement pulled her attention back to the foyer. The guard's radio crackled again. "HQ sends clarification access granted. Hold until further notice." He glanced at the mirrored ceiling panels, his eyes widening as though grappling with the weight of conflicting directives. Around him, expo personnel exhaled softly, a collective sigh of relief for the resolution that appeared imminent. The brass stanchions were about to part like the Red Sea. Yet Aisha's stance remained firm. She understood that privilege could be as invisible as protocol, and reversing a single order did not rewrite the underlying attitude that allowed such barriers in the first place. The guard raised his hand as if to signal the corridor doors open, but she shook her head imperceptibly, signaling that access alone was not enough. The guard's hand paused, mid-air confusion flickering on his stoic face. He swallowed, swallowing the unwelcome notion that policy amendments were sometimes more harmful than the original exclusion. Aisha's pulse steadied. The tide of public scrutiny had shifted the guard's hand, but not yet the corporation's culture. She needed more than a passing concession. She wanted a guarantee that no one else, no colleague, no partner would be shut out behind these doors. In that pregnant pause, she allowed the world to see her resolve. Cameras captured the ripple of authority in her stance, the imperceptible tightening of her jaw. the slow tilt of her head that conveyed unspoken determination. The guard, feeling the gravity of her gaze, lowered his hand and radioed once more, this time with a stammered request. "Stand by, new instruction incoming." The mirrored corridor remained shut. The brass barrier refused to budge. Aisha exhaled her breath, forming a fleeting cloud in the cool foyer air. She glanced once more at the innovation and crisis response banners, at the state-of-the-art prototypes shimmering behind their glass enclosures. Then she met the guard's eyes and asked in a steady voice, "Will you confirm that no protocol will ever again be used to exclude a confirmed speaker, especially one whose technology protects the most vulnerable?" Her words hung heavy in the charged air. The guard's radio speaker crackled with static-laced approval. Directive updated, guarantee no further exclusions for verified participants. Around the foyer, staffers snapped to attention, stumbling over their own relief. The guards parted their arms, lowering, and the mirrored doors slid open like ceremonial gates unveiling a new chapter. Yet as the barrier dissolved, Aisha allowed a few more moments to capture the tableau. The guard's overt apology, the staffers' sheepish bows, the podium's distant gleam calling her name. In those seconds, she crystallized the lesson that would guide the remainder of the conference: access without equity is nothing more than an illusion. As she prepared to reclaim her stage, Aisha knew that the real demonstration lay not in the slides she'd present, but in the changes she'd demand. Changes born not of one concession, but of a shift in conviction that no policy could ever trump respect. "Dr." Aisha Grant's finger hovered over her phone, the screen's glow reflecting in her determined eyes. 10 minutes had passed since she'd been snubbed at the armored checkpoint. 10 minutes in which her credentials had been questioned, her authority challenged, and her very presence at the Global Energy Security Expo made a matter of debate. Now she was ready to escalate the standoff from a hallway dispute to a matter of public record. She tapped the screen twice. The first text sent to her legal team read simply, "Document every refusal. Prepare immediate injunction." Within seconds, her counsel's acknowledgement pinged back on it, requesting all video and witness statements. The second message flew across the digital air to the Expo director's office. "Explain this exclusion within 5 minutes or face public action." She hit send before hesitation could creep in. The bid for clarity was unambiguous. She demanded accountability or would force the spotlight onto their internal processes. Across the corridor, the VIP lounge, the plush enclave reserved for speakers and sponsors, buzzed to life. Aisha's media advisors, positioned discreetly at the fringe of the gathering, snapped open cameras and switched to live feed modes. Their lenses were aimed not at cocktail trays or networking clusters, but at the foyer itself, where Aisha's confrontation had already become the expo's unintended centerpiece. Quiet murmurs of anticipation rippled through the assembled delegates. The champagne flute paused midway to the lips. Phones were lifted like banners in a slow-motion wave of collective curiosity. Back in the foyer, Expo PR staff exchanged nervous glances. They were the ones who crafted press releases extolling technological breakthroughs and strategic partnerships, never a crisis born from barring their keynote speaker. Now whispers of potential scandal fluttered up the cement corridors, resonating off exposed ceilings and polished floors. Event organizers shifted uneasily behind the mirrored doors where they had once felt insulated from accountability by corporate protocols and chain-of-command buffers. The ground tilted beneath them as Aisha's legal threat loomed, an authoritative presence that threatened to upend every expectation of the evening. Aisha slipped her phone into her pocket, the soft click of the latch resonant in the charged hush. She turned to Malik, her operations lieutenant, standing vigil with a steadying hand on his tablet. He nodded, imperceptibly. Security logs were now sealed, timestamps, verified witness contact information recorded. Every action, every utterance, not just from the guard, but from every Expo official, was being archived for possible legal citation. The meticulous documentation that had saved lives in crisis zones was now being deployed in this high-stakes boardroom battle. The mirrored doors parted once more as a hastily assembled delegation approached the Expo's general counsel, a procurement manager, and a deputy director of operations. Their expressions blended contrition and desperation, faces postured for reconciliation, but eyes shifting as if calculating the risk in Aisha's calm advantage. Dr. Grant, the Expo's general counsel, began in a voice rehearsed for diplomacy, We've reviewed the situation. Your credentials are valid, and you are, of course, welcome to deliver your keynote. His words hung in the air, but Aisha's posture remained unyielding. She had no interest in mere grudging permission. She sought systemic change. "Thank you," she said, voice low but carrying through the corridor like the reverberation of a gavel. "I appreciate the clarification. However, this incident highlights a critical flaw in your access controls and event management procedures. A single guard's error should not dictate the terms of engagement for a speaker contracted months ago." She paused to let the weight of her words settle. The Expo's deputy director stepped forward, tablet in hand, fingers poised over notes. She spoke quickly. "We intend to update our system so that VIP speaker credentials automatically sync across all checkpoints. This evening's schedule will be adjusted to ensure no further delays. A memorandum will circulate to all floor staff immediately." Aisha's gaze swept the trio legal counsel procurement manager, deputy director, as if measuring their sincerity. "That's a start," she replied, "but I require more than a one-off fix. I need an assurance that no other project or presenter, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, will face arbitrary exclusion. I want a written commitment co-signed by your CEO and the Expo's board outlining a non-discrimination policy with specific enforcement mechanisms. Otherwise, I will proceed with the injunction, and this event will be overshadowed by legal motions rather than technological innovation." A flurry of whispers passed among the Expo officials. The procurement manager's forehead creased. The deputy director hesitated, glancing down at her tablet as though drafting the promised policy statement in real time. The general counsel's lips pressed into a thin line, the gears of corporate liability turning behind the facade of cordiality. Meanwhile, the Expo's live stream feed switched camera angles, capturing Aisha's composed challenge from multiple perspectives. Online viewers saw her profile framed by the gleaming hardware of her safe haven prototype, its metal ribs and solar panels, a stark contrast to the veneer of exclusivity that had first barred her entry. Comments cascaded on the screen. CEO Battle Royale. "They can't block a UN advisor. Unlock that." Keynote, a groundswell of public support forming in real time. The Expo's PR chief, visible through the glass doors, stepped back to brief her team. She murmured into her headset, "Prepare standing statements. Draft the policy pledge, coordinate press releases." The crisis management plan, once a theoretical document tucked into a dusty binder, now sprang to life. Its action items triggered by Aisha's deft maneuvering. Aisha's assistant re-emerged, tablet in hand, and fed her the latest updates. The written policy draft was in her inbox, pending signatures. A press advisory was queued to go out in 10 minutes. Legal counsel had signaled that no further injunction was necessary if commitments were met. Aisha nodded to acknowledge the information, then turned back to face the Expo delegation. In 5 minutes, she reminded them, "I expect the signed non-discrimination policy with enforcement clauses delivered to my team. Your failure to comply will leave me no choice but to file the injunction at the local courthouse and hold a press conference at the steps of this hall." The threat, cloaked in procedural terms, resonated with unequivocal clarity. At that moment, the mirrored doors slid shut behind the Expo officials, confining them to the hollow foyer where the confrontation had unfolded. Staffers who had once fluttered with polite detachment now hovered at the edges, uncertain whether to resume their duties or bear witness to the aftermath of Aisha's demand. The air buzzed with anticipation. The Expo's polished rhythm had been disrupted, replaced by the pulse of a battleground ethic. Malik tapped Aisha's shoulder, signaling that the cameras were ready. The guard, once so immovable, stood off to the side, his radio crackling in his ear as though still awaiting forbidden commands. Aisha inhaled deeply, the cool corridor air filling her lungs, then stepped back to lean against the wall. She straightened her power suit, smoothing an imaginary line in her jacket, and allowed her gaze to soften, not in repose, but in quiet assurance. In that tense lull, the flicker of her phone signaled incoming confirmations, the policy draft now co-signed by the Expo CEO's digital signature. A message from legal confirming that all documentation was ready to be filed. A note from PR outlining the press advisory slated for distribution within moments. The apparatus she had set in motion was primed to operate legally, publicly, irrevocably. A group of junior engineers from SentinelShield arrived to support her, their eyes wide with admiration and a hint of disbelief that their leader had turned a moment of exclusion into an agent of systemic change. They offered respectfully folded programs and water bottles, their gestures echoing solidarity and respect. Aisha nodded each time, acknowledging their presence as essential proof that the principles she fought for extended beyond headlines shaping the culture of her own team. Finally, the corridors beyond the mirrored doors brightened as Expo staff returned clutching printed policy documents and framed assurances. The crowd in the foyer parted like a sea making way for a tide. Aisha stepped forward, her heels clicking on polished stone, each step measured and irrevocable. The Expo's PR chief emerged to join the public fray, her expression a mix of relief and resolve. "Dr. Grant," she said, voice amplified by the corridor's acoustics on behalf of the Expo board, "we commit to your terms. Here is the signed policy. We apologize truly and pledge to uphold equitable access for every speaker, sponsor, and guest. Your session is restored, and we look forward to your keynote." Aisha accepted the folder, glancing at the signatures, the Expo CEO, the board chair, and the Director of Equity and Inclusion. She closed it, her expression one of complete composure. "Thank you," she replied, voice steady. "I look forward to seeing these policies enforced and to demonstrating technologies that will save lives across the globe." As she turned to enter the main hall, the cameras caught her steely silhouette framed by the open doors, an invocation of change that would ripple far beyond the Expo. The twist had been set, prejudice, confronted by principle, had yielded to policy under the relentless pressure of accountability. And as the doors swung fully open, Aisha Grant reclaimed her stage, not as a concession, but as confirmation that dignity and justice would no longer be negotiable. Dr. Aisha Grant moved with the inexorable purpose of a rising tide, her polished heels clicking across the marble floor as she passed the guard who had once barred her. At her side, her general counsel, Anna Patel, carried a slim binder of legal notices and signed policy drafts. Behind her, a cadre of journalists' cameras poised fanned out to capture every moment. The Expo director burst through the double doors, cheeks flushed and hands trembling. "Dr. Grant, you're cleared, please. The stage is yours," he stammered. Aisha paused before stepping into the main hall, her back to a sea of expectant faces. Crystal chandeliers overhead refracted the light, bathing the rows of chairs and polished podium in a warm glow. Delegates rose in unison, applause surging like waves, eager to welcome her. Yet she held up a single hand, bringing silence as immediate and commanding as the hush at the eye of a storm. "I appreciate the clearance," she began, voice steady and resonant, carrying without amplification. "But I will only take this stage once you publicly acknowledge that I was wrongfully excluded." Her gaze swept the assembled crowd from the Expo director's pained expression to the silent journalist capturing every nuance. And she continued, "I require your commitment to full transparency in credentialing all speakers and attendees effective immediately." A gasp rippled through the audience. The tension already poised on a razor's edge sharpened into a collective intake of breath. Phones and cameras pivoted toward the stage's giant screens where Anna Patel tapped a tablet. Within moments, the live feed flickered to life, replacing the floral banner behind the podium with footage from the foyer, the guard's clipped refusal, the tablet's red error message, Aisha's composed challenge. The video played in real time, each frame a damning indictment of the Expo's opaque processes. In the communications room upstairs, red warning lights blinked as the screens lit up with unscripted content. Expo staffers in headsets ducked beneath console lights, delivering rapid-fire updates. "Security breach, unauthorized feed, halt all programming." Their practiced calm unraveled as alarms chimed, signaling the unauthorized broadcast. For the first time, the Expo's tightly controlled narrative splintered on the polished floor of the main stage, spilling into the public domain. Aisha's assistant, Malik, opened a live document on screen, a list of policy demands now being sent to every executive inbox. The bullet points scrolled upward. Public acknowledgement of wrongful exclusion. Publication of the revised credentialing protocol. Appointment of an external oversight committee. Quarterly audits to ensure compliance. Each item pinged executives' devices, triggering notifications and urgent flag icons. Board members paused mid-conversation in breakout rooms, the LED tickers on their tablets revealing the same list. In her measured cadence, Aisha had converted personal affront into institutional imperative. The expo director swallowed hard and stepped forward, smoothing his tie as though straightening a frayed ribbon of authority. He cleared his throat, his voice wavering yet determined. Dr. Grant, on behalf of the Global Energy Security Expo Board. I sincerely apologize for the wrongful exclusion you experienced. We pledge in full transparency to overhaul our credentialing system immediately. We will publish our new protocols within the hour and establish a review board to oversee access controls. His words hung in the charged silence, a corporate olive branch extended across the auditorium. Aisha allowed a moment for the concession to land to become the seed of real change. This apology was more than a personal vindication. It was an inflection point for every participant who might otherwise have been sidelined by unseen bias. As the director concluded, her media advisors signaled the cameras to pan back onto her. A hush settled once more, the hush of anticipation threaded with relief. Aisha stepped to the edge of the stage, the spotlight catching the glint of her UN lapel pin, a testament to her years advocating for civilians in crisis zones. She smiled not in triumph, but in purpose. "Thank you," she said, voice clear and unwavering. "Now let us turn to the real reason we are gathered here, the safe haven deployment units. Lives depend on our ability to move swiftly and equitably." She motioned toward the prototype at the stage's side, its collapsible framework gleaming under the lights. "In just 2 minutes, we will demonstrate how these modules engineered with precision and compassion can be operational in any conflict zone worldwide." A collective exhale swept the room. Where tension had tightened like a drawn bow now, curiosity and admiration flowed in equal measure. The Expo's technical team activated the stage controls, unveiling the Safe Haven module in a choreographed demonstration walls rising solar panels, unfurling air filtration systems humming to life. Each mechanism clicked into place, a silent orchestra of innovation that spoke louder than any policy or apology. As the module completed its deployment, Aisha approached the microphone once more. Cameras cut between her confident stance and the illuminated shelter behind her. This, she declared, is the culmination of expertise, determination, and yes, the right to speak and to be heard. Let us never again allow barriers, whether procedural or prejudicial, to block what matters most, saving lives. Thunderous applause erupted. Journalists rose their lenses, capturing the emotional resonance of the moment. A CEO who transformed exclusion into empowerment, a corporation that pledged real reform, and an expo that learned its most critical lesson on its own stage. The applause was sustained, the highest accolade for a leader who demanded not only access, but equity. Back in the corridors, the phalanx of Expo officials watched the live feed on their devices, seeing the transformation from crisis to climax. Emails confirming the policy updates continued to stream in. By the time the applause subsided, the rewritten credentialing guidelines were already being drafted and uploaded to the Expo's website. The Oversight Committee was convened that very evening, and headlines rolled out. CEO Dr. Aisha Grant turns exclusion into evolution at Global Expo Safe Haven, demo delivers hope and hard truths. For Aisha, the climactic twist was more than a personal victory. It was a testament to the power of action backed by principle. In 15 minutes, she had turned a moment of bias into a mandate for accountability, harnessed the glare of public scrutiny to enact systemic change, and reclaimed her stage not just for herself, but for every speaker and attendee whose voice might otherwise have been muted. As the applause faded and the Safe Haven module stood sentinel behind her, Aisha Grant surveyed the hall. She saw not only the faces of delegates, but the promise of futures safeguarded by technology and guided by equity. In that instant, the true meaning of crisis response came into focus, the willingness to confront barriers, demand justice, and deploy solutions with urgency and compassion. And on that stage, her stage, Dr. Aisha Grant, had delivered exactly that. Within the hour, the Global Energy Security Expo's executive team convened an emergency press briefing in the hall's cavernous conference room, its walls still reverberating from the earlier crescendo of applause. Dr. Aisha Grant stood quietly to one side as the Expo's CEO, Jonathan Metz, stepped to the podium, eyes reflecting both contrition and resolve. The rows of media lights blinked on, capturing the moment when a single corporate apology would attempt to bridge the chasm of exclusion that had threatened to eclipse the event's entire mission. Metz cleared his throat, pausing to let the anticipation ripple through the assembled press. On behalf of the Global Energy Security Expo board and staff, he began, voice steady but earnest. We owe Dr. Aisha Grant and every delegate an unreserved apology. Our protocols failed to recognize her rightful role as keynote speaker, and in doing so, we undermine not only her leadership, but the very principles of equity and access this forum stands for. He shifted slightly, glancing at the stock ticker displaying Expo registrations climbing in real time. Effective immediately, no badge issued to an invited speaker shall be invalidated without just cause, and any dispute shall be escalated directly to the Expo Director's office for immediate resolution. A hush fell as cameras panned across the room. Industry analysts, government representatives, press corps, all witnesses to the formal admission that despite the Expo's image of flawless security technology and logistical precision, a barrier of bias had gone unchecked. Metz continued. Furthermore, we are proud to announce the adoption of SentinelShield's Secure Event Standard, a comprehensive framework to ensure unimpeded access and dignified treatment for all presenters. Within the next 30 days, every staff member and security contractor will complete bias awareness training developed in partnership with SentinelShield. We will monitor compliance through quarterly audits and publish the results to maintain full transparency. As he spoke, Aisha watched the ripple effect unfold across the lobby monitors. The Expo's website updated its homepage with a banner linking to the new policy text event apps refreshed to display the Secure Event Standard, and email alerts buzzed through attendees' inboxes, each one affirming the new commitment. In the VIP lounge, her media advisors exchanged nods of satisfaction as they prepared to spread the story far beyond the Expo's walls. This was no mere apology, it was the genesis of structural reform. Industry outlets wasted no time in amplifying the news. By mid-afternoon, headlines blazed across both trade publications and mainstream news sites. Expo apologizes to CEO after VIP snub pledges, policy overhaul. A masterclass in turnaround. How Dr. Aisha Grant transformed exclusion into reform and secure event standard, set to become industry benchmark. Analysts opined that the Expo's swift public reckoning would boost long-term credibility far more than a silent correction hidden behind closed doors. One prominent trade magazine quoted a seasoned event planner. This is the blueprint for any conference that values inclusion. Aisha Grant forced the issue, and the Expo delivered reform in record time. Registrations, which had plateaued in the days leading up to the event, suddenly spiked. Corporate delegations announced last-minute sign-ups, eager to align themselves with an Expo that had demonstrated genuine accountability. Government agencies that had hesitated to send high-level envoys reversed course, citing the Expo's newly minted policies as evidence of its reliability. The registration desk, once a site of bureaucratic tedium, became a scene of animated renewals and endorsements, attendees elbowing through lines to secure prime seats. Behind the scenes, the Expo's organizing committee moved at breakneck speed to operationalize the Secure Event Standard. Their first task was an all-staff virtual town hall where senior leadership walked through real-life scenarios adapted from Aisha's confrontation, illustrating how to handle disputes over credentials step by step. Security teams who had once relied solely on pre-programmed tablet scans now integrated a secondary live verification process that cross-referenced speaker information with a cloud-based registry maintained by SentinelShield. Any anomaly triggered an immediate hotline to a designated equity officer, ensuring that no one would ever be left at the gate. The Expo's chief of operations, a veteran of global logistics, oversaw the rollout of temporary kiosks equipped with mobile scanning units and on-the-spot badge reissuance capabilities. These pop-up stations placed strategically at every entrance meant that a mistyped name or a data sync error would no longer result in exclusion. Instead, speakers and VIPs could receive a corrected credential in minutes, and just as importantly, with an apology extended in person. SentinelShield, recognizing the wider implications, opened the Secure Event Standard for licensing to other conferences. Within a week, professional associations in cybersecurity, renewable energy, and humanitarian relief had reached out to adopt the framework. Memo-worthy testimony at an international event in Geneva declared that after witnessing the Global Energy Security Expo's rapid policy reversal, we have no excuse for excluding any legitimate presenter. By the time the expo concluded, 24 organizations had pre-registered for the secure event certification process. Aisha's own keynote, the one she had nearly been prevented from delivering, took on new resonance. When she finally stepped to the mic, the crowd's applause mingled relief, respect, and renewed optimism. She spoke not only about shelter-in-place technology, but about the imperative to dismantle barriers within our own communities. In conflict zones, she reminded the audience we build shelters to protect civilians from external threats. But here in places of collaboration and innovation, we must build shelters of policy to protect ideas and leaders from the threats of bias and exclusion. Her words were met with a standing ovation that carried through the final panel discussion and into the networking receptions. In the weeks that followed, anecdotes from other conferences underscored the ripple effect of Aisha's stand. A medical symposium in London credited the secure event standard with averting a similar credentialing snafu, while a technology summit in Singapore integrated bias awareness modules into their speaker onboarding. Even smaller regional gatherings found value in the expo's experience, adopting portions of the policy to safeguard against unintentional slights that could damage reputations and suppress vital research. Back at SentinelShield's global headquarters, the team tracked key performance indicators for event inclusivity metrics that had once been absent from their dashboards. They logged the number of credential disputes, response times for resolution, and participant satisfaction scores. The data revealed dramatic improvements, a 98% reduction in access-related complaints, and a 25% uptick in speaker diversity. These numbers reinforced the notion that equitable access was not just a moral imperative, but also a driver of creativity, collaboration, and trust. Meanwhile, the Global Energy Security Expo's internal review board met to codify the policy changes into the organization's bylaws. They voted to add a permanent seat for an independent equity officer on the planning committee, ensuring that no future board could slip into the complacency that had nearly cost them their most impactful keynote. The board chair reviewing the final draft remarked to his colleagues, "We've turned a potential fiasco into a foundation for leadership." The sentiment encapsulated the transformation that a single refusal had catalyzed. As the dust settled on the expo, Aisha Grant reflected on the journey from exclusion to empowerment. She received countless notes of gratitude from young female engineers, inspired by her resolve from conference organizers, grateful for a roadmap to inclusion, and from global partners impressed by how swiftly policy and principle could align. More than revenue or recognition, it was this outpouring of solidarity that affirmed the true impact of her actions. In the end, the story of Dr. Aisha Grant and the Global Energy Security Expo became a case study in how confronting bias head-on can yield systemic change. It wasn't enough to open one door. The lasting victory was in rewriting the script so that no barrier, procedural or unconscious, could ever stand unmoved. And as the expo's banners came down and the world's most advanced shelters were packed away, the legacy of that pivotal day endured an industry newly committed to ensuring that every voice, every idea, every life-saving innovation would have unimpeded access to the stage. Dr. Aisha Grant paused at the podium, the applause tapering into a reverent hush that filled the expansive hall. Her safe haven prototype stood behind her, fully deployed, a gleaming testament to human ingenuity and compassion. Yet in that moment, all eyes were on her, the CEO who had transformed a moment of exclusion into a movement for inclusion. The global energy security community had gathered to hear her insights on rapid response infrastructure, but they would depart carrying a far broader lesson. She inhaled deeply, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the stage lights. Leaning forward, she let the weight of the journey settle into her voice. Small slights stack into systemic barriers. She began the resonance of her tone rippling through the audience like a pulse. Every time someone is told no, no entry, no recognition, no respect, those moments pile up. They form walls we can't always see until we bump into them, sometimes in the most unlikely places, even here at the very event built to showcase solutions. Aisha's words lingered, echoing off the high ceilings. She pictured the mirrored foyer where she had been stopped the uniformed guard who had recited policy instead of greeting a keynote speaker, the screens flickering with her challenge. Those images had become more than a personal affront. They had crystallized a universal truth that dignity once denied demands restitution. With dignity denied, she continued swift action demands respect. She let those syllables settle, then leaned closer to the camera positioned at the center aisle, its lens a conduit to thousands watching remotely. I stood at a locked door not because I lacked credentials, but because the system let bias hide behind procedure. When that shameful moment arrived, I had two choices: accept it and stay silent, or reclaim my voice and my right to speak. Her gaze intensified, unwavering and direct. I chose the latter, and so can each of you. A soft murmur rose as attendees nodded, the energy shifting from admiration of her technical expertise to solidarity with her conviction. Aisha acknowledged the shift with a small, knowing smile. Today, you're not just participants in an expo, you're architects of accountability. You're the ones who can dismantle the barriers in your organizations, your communities, and your own lives. Because when one barrier falls, it doesn't just open a door for one person. It cracks the foundation for everyone who follows. She paused, scanning the faces before her. In the front row sat diplomats who had funded her project's industry partners, who had signed multi-million-dollar contracts, and young engineers scribbling notes on event-branded notepads. Even at the back, latecomers leaned forward, their attention fixed beyond the stage's edge. Aisha softened her tone as though sharing a personal secret. Let me ask you, have you ever been shut out where you belonged? Have you ever felt your dignity dismissed because of a policy, a prejudice, or an assumption? If you have, you know exactly why this matters. At that moment, a hush deeper than the previous one swept through the hall. Phones were raised not in listless recording, but in solidarity, ready to capture the rallying cry that would follow. Aisha held her hand out, palm upward, an open invitation. Share your story below in the comments or in conversations at your next meeting, because each story shines a light on where we still fall short, and each story gives voice to the promise of change. She let her words hang, a silent yet potent charge to every viewer. The hall lights dimmed gradually, spotlight narrowing on her. If you believe that justice shouldn't wait. Her tone rose with deliberate warmth, then hit. Like, ring that bell. And join this channel. Here, we won't let exclusion be the final answer. Here, we will share stories of power, reclaimed stories that remind us we have the agency to rewrite the rules. Behind her screens flickered to life with highlights of the confrontation, the locked doors, the challenge, the live broadcast, and the ultimate entrance. Each clip played in rapid succession, a visual drumbeat underscoring her final charge. Then the screens faded to the Secure Event Standard logo, SentinelShield's emblem, and the words, "Stand up, speak out. Never accept exclusion." Aisha let silence fill the space again, her final words poised on the edge of that moment. Stand up, speak out, and never accept exclusion as the final answer. The simplicity of the mantra belied its power, each phrase a call to arms for inclusivity. The orchestra hidden in the rafters began a soft stirring motif, notes rising in parallel with the audience's rising resolve. Aisha stepped back, gathering the folds of her tailored blazer with a gracious nod. She offered one last beam of gratitude. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for committing to action. Now let us go forward together. With that, she descended the stage, the hall erupting in sustained applause that soared beyond technical panels and funding announcements, reaching into the realm of shared humanity. As she walked through the crowd, delegates reached out, some to shake her hand, others to embrace her. Their faces bore expressions of respect, determination, and hope. Whispers of, "That was powerful," and "I'll never look at gate policies the same way" drifted around her. In the VIP lounge afterward, conversations ignited, vows were exchanged to overhaul access protocols at future events, and partnerships formed to standardize bias training modules industry-wide. For Dr. Aisha Grant, the journey had come full circle, from locked doors to open dialogue, from exclusion to empowerment, and from silence to collective action. But even as she looked toward the next project, the safe haven deployments awaiting urgent deployment, the imprint of that final moment remained indelible, a rallying cry that would echo long after the lights dimmed and the expo banners were taken down. And as attendees filed out, inspired and resolute, Aisha's words lingered in their minds. Stand up, speak out, and never accept exclusion as the final answer. In conversations over coffee in boardrooms around the world, and in conference halls yet to host their next keynote speakers, that mantra would reverberate, reminding everyone that dignity is not negotiable, and that when justice is demanded swift, it can reshape institutions and lives alike.